What if a single photograph could unravel everything we thought we knew about a forgotten corner of Alabama? Why does a family with no birth records, no graves, and no witnesses still haunt official archives over a century later? And what was it about their faces, identical, expressionless, unnatural, that left researchers speechless? This isn't folklore. This is the story of the Whitmores, and once you've seen the photo, you'll understand why no one talks about them. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. In the summer of 1915, a photograph was taken on the outskirts of Clay County, Alabama, a seemingly ordinary family portrait. It features 9 individuals, 2 adults seated at the center, surrounded by children of various ages, their postures stiff, expressions muted. The backdrop is a simple wooden structure, likely their homestead, framed by parched fields and a sagging fence. At first glance, it is unremarkable, just another relic of rural America, captured in the stillness of the early 20th century. But as one lingers on the image, a quiet unease begins to emerge. Something is off, and the eye cannot help but return to it, again and again. Their faces, though set in the somber tone of early photography, seem almost unnaturally similar. The children, in particular, bear such striking resemblance to one another that their individual features begin to blur. Foreheads of identical slope, noses carved from the same bone, lips that curve with uncanny symmetry. The more one observes, the more the differences between them dissolve. The older boy and the youngest girl might be a mirror, separated only by time. Even the eyes, deep-set and slightly wide, possess a uniformity rarely found outside of controlled breeding. There is no sign of joy, fatigue, or even discomfort, only stillness, only silence. The adults, assumed to be the parents, wear expressions equally unreadable. The man, broad-shouldered and with a thick beard, sits erect with one hand resting stiffly on his knee. The woman beside him, thinner and with a face both severe and weary, holds the youngest child in her lap. She stares directly at the camera, but her gaze doesn't quite meet the lens. It drifts, just slightly, as though looking past it or through it. None of them touch each other. No arms across shoulders, no hands held. Each body, though close, seems suspended in isolation. No photographer's name is marked on the back. Only the date, July 1915, written in pencil, and a faded stamp from a Birmingham drugstore. The image was rediscovered decades later in a mislabeled archive box, buried among agricultural records and forgotten census documents. It was the archivist who first noticed the irregularities. He did not call it disturbing, only peculiar, the kind of peculiarity that lingers in the subconscious long after the photograph is returned to its sleeve. Local records list the family under the name Whitmore, though even that detail is contested. Several entries from the same period show variations in spelling, Whitmer, Whitman, Whitmore, suggesting either a lack of consistency or a deliberate obfuscation. No other images of them have been found. No birth certificates, no marriage licenses, no church rosters bearing their names. Only this single, static image, brittle with time, its corners frayed and curling inward as if trying to hide itself. The setting sun, judging by the angle of the shadows, suggests the photo was taken in the late afternoon. The children's clothes are simple but clean. The girls wear identical dresses with minor differences in hemming. The boys, loose shirts tucked into belted trousers. One boy, possibly the eldest, stands at the edge of the frame, half in shadow. His face is turned slightly away, obscuring part of his profile, or perhaps deliberately avoiding the gaze of the camera. It is this image, more than any written record or oral account, that has fueled speculation for over a century. It is a photograph that demands to be looked at, yet offers no answers. The longer one stares, the more questions it raises. Who were they, really? Why does their resemblance seem engineered? And why, in a state filled with churchgoers, town halls, and genealogies carved in stone, does no one remember the Whitmore family? And still, the photograph remains. A single moment in time, static, quiet, and unbearably present. The Whitmore property lay deep within the pine-choked backwoods of Clay County, where dirt roads narrowed into footpaths and maps surrendered to memory. It was a parcel of land few remembered owning and fewer still dared to visit. Those who did recalled a stillness unnatural even for the countryside, not the silence of solitude, but of absence. There were no barking dogs, no children's laughter, no sounds of labor echoing across the fields, just a kind of watching quiet, heavy and unmoving. The farmhouse itself stood 2 stories tall, its roof sagging under the weight of rusted tin sheets, and its paint long since stripped away by wind and sun. An adjacent barn, half collapsed, hinted at a time when animals might have been kept, though no one remembered seeing livestock there. By all accounts, the Whitmores maintained themselves without outside help. They planted, harvested, slaughtered, and preserved everything they needed. Their farm was not a place of commerce or hospitality. It was a fortress, and whatever occurred within its bounds remained within. The family rarely ventured into town. Once every few months, the father, identified by some as Elias Whitmore, would arrive in Lineville with a horse-drawn cart, purchasing only essentials: salt, kerosene, flour, needles, rope. He never bartered, never spoke more than necessary, and never brought company. Storekeepers noted the strangeness of his eyes, wide and unfocused, as if fixed on something behind you. Children were told not to stare. When winter fell hard in 1914 and many farms in the region suffered, the Whitmores did not appear. No one saw them seeking aid, buying coal, or offering slaughtered meat. They endured without assistance, insulated from the hardships of the surrounding county. And when spring returned, their fields were inexplicably green, as if untouched by the frost that had blackened every neighboring crop. No one could explain it. Some whispered of witchcraft, others of stolen resources. Most simply turned away. Neighbors, if such a word applies, began to avoid the area altogether. Livestock refused to graze near the Whitmore boundary. A local preacher sent to minister the region spoke only once of his visit, describing a spiritual void that clung to the house like mildew. He never returned, and the circuit thereafter bypassed the region entirely. Rumors filled the vacuum, that the family performed rites in the woods, that strange sounds could be heard at night, not screams, but something worse, something wordless. None of it could be proven. None of it could be dismissed. There was talk of a midwife who had once visited the farm in the early 1900s, called by the father during what he described as a difficult labor. She returned hours later, pale and speechless, and moved out of the county within weeks. Her name does not appear in any official ledger. Her fate, like so many others touched by the Whitmores, dissolved into whispers. The land itself bore strange qualities. Visitors described a metallic taste in the air, and birds never nested in the trees nearby. On several occasions, county officials attempted to survey the property, only to find their instruments malfunctioning inexplicably. One surveyor claimed that his compass spun wildly whenever he crossed the southern fence. He abandoned the job and never filed his report. By 1915, the Whitmores had become less a family than a cautionary tale, a name passed in low voices and seldom written down. They paid no taxes, yet no collections were made. They owned no slaves, no workers, no hands beyond their own. And yet, their fields were tilled, their roof mended, their firewood chopped and stacked with uncanny regularity, as if the house sustained itself, as if the rhythms of life there obeyed different rules. Among the oldest residents, there are those who claim the family was not always isolated, that in some distant past, the Whitmores were known in town, sociable even. But something changed, something unspoken, and they withdrew, folding in on themselves like a wound healing wrong. No event is named, no date is given, only the certainty that by the time the photograph was taken, the transformation was complete. Whatever the truth may be, the Whitmore farm remains a place where questions outnumber facts, a patch of land where the trees seem older, the air heavier, and time itself uncertain. In the decades following the disappearance of the Whitmores, Clay County grew quieter about its past. The photograph remained unclaimed in the county archives, and the family's name faded from local conversations, not through forgetfulness, but through deliberate omission. When outsiders began asking questions in the 1960s, amateur historians, folklore collectors, university researchers, they encountered a wall not of ignorance, but of practiced restraint. Those old enough to remember said little. Those who knew more said nothing at all. A retired clerk from the county registrar's office once recalled finding a drawer filled with incomplete forms. Several bore the surname Whitmore, birth entries, land deeds, even a marriage license, but none were filed officially. Each was signed, stamped, and dated, but every record lacked a final page or bore stains that rendered them illegible. The clerk, who kept a personal notebook of anomalies encountered during her 35 years of service, described the Whitmore entries as present but absent. She died in 1973, and the notebook was never found among her belongings. In 1922, a schoolteacher named Lillian Kearns attempted to register children she believed to be Whitmores. She encountered them in the woods near the county border, thin and silent, watching her from between the trees. She described their clothes as handmade and outdated, their skin pale despite the summer heat. Troubled by the encounter, she submitted their names, if they could be called that, to the school board. The names were phonetic, given in whispers: Ephra, Jocelyn, Ever. No last name, no dates of birth. Her request was ignored. A month later, she was transferred to another district. Her personnel file notes excessive preoccupation with non-enrolled children. One of the few surviving newspaper articles to reference the Whitmores appears in a July 1916 issue of the Lineville Gazette. A brief mention, buried in the local notices column, reads, "Inquiries concerning the Whitmore family should be directed to the county assessor's office. No further information will be released at this time." No preceding article explains the context. No follow-up was ever printed. Interviews with descendants of local officials reveal a quiet agreement among certain families, an understanding that some matters were better left untouched. A former sheriff's grandson recalled a locked drawer in his grandfather's study, opened only once in his presence. Inside were 4 items: a faded photograph, a small cloth doll with its eyes sewn shut, a length of black hair tied with twine, and a letter. The letter, handwritten and unsigned, warned that continued interference will invite the same silence that binds them. The boy, now an old man himself, remembered the tremble in his grandfather's hand as he relocked the drawer. No formal investigation into the Whitmores was ever launched. The state did not intervene, despite rumors of child neglect, unlawful seclusion, and suspected mental illness. A social worker who attempted a visit in 1931 disappeared en route. Her car was found abandoned near a washed-out bridge with her satchel still inside. The case remains unsolved. Her file, reviewed decades later, contained a note scribbled in the margin: "Advise against further pursuit." The town of Lineville, and Clay County more broadly, underwent the transformations common to the American South. Industry arrived, roads were paved, and schools modernized. But the Whitmore property remained untouched. The county tax records list the land as unoccupied agricultural, with no active ownership transfer since 1899. Inquiries into its current legal status yield only dead ends. Surveyors refuse to map the parcel. Realtors avoid its coordinates. In time, the silence hardened into folklore. Children grew up hearing tales of a family who whispered in an unknown tongue and lived without clocks or calendars. Teenagers dared each other to find the path to the old farm, but few returned with proof. Most said they'd gotten lost. Some claimed the path had vanished entirely. One boy, in 1984, came back after 3 days missing. He refused to speak and spent the rest of his life in institutional care, drawing the same farmhouse over and over again. The community, in its collective refusal, built a wall higher than any fence. A silence that no longer merely protected a mystery, but became part of it, woven into the soil, the records, and the names no longer spoken aloud. In 1978, a team of anthropologists from the University of Alabama launched a study focused on genetic drift in isolated rural populations. Funded quietly by a federal grant with no public press release, the project sought to map familial lines in communities where intermarriage and generational confinement had created unique genetic signatures. They began in counties where roads still turned to clay in rainstorms, where surnames repeated every third mailbox. When they reached Clay County, they encountered a name that had long since vanished from directories but lingered in the margins of memory: Whitmore. The initial survey revealed anomalies, patterns in cranial development, dental irregularities, and metabolic conditions consistent with prolonged endogamy. One specimen, a middle-aged woman institutionalized since childhood, displayed a constellation of traits found nowhere else in the state registry. Her skull was elongated subtly at the crown, her hearing impaired by malformed inner structures. Her speech, when it emerged, came in fractured syllables that bore no resemblance to English or any recognized dialect. She had no known relatives, no official birthplace, and no listed parents. But a faded intake note from the facility recorded the name Whitmore, scribbled beside a question mark. The team expanded their inquiry. Local hospitals yielded sparse data. Most rural births before 1940 had gone unrecorded, or else the records had been destroyed in a series of unexplained fires at the courthouse in the 1950s. Dental clinics remembered a few strange cases, children with too many teeth or none at all. An old practitioner recalled extracting a molar from a boy whose gums were blackened with what he described as ash under the skin. The boy had no file, no follow-up. When pressed, the dentist only muttered, "They always came alone." Further leads emerged from blood samples archived in a regional lab, mislabeled or misfiled. One batch, anonymous, dated 1933, showed chromosomal markers not seen in any other demographic. The anomalies were subtle but undeniable. A mutation in the 6th chromosome, inert by appearance, yet consistent across 5 of the 7 samples. Attempts to trace their origin were halted by an internal review. The official explanation? Contamination? The files were sealed. The lab director resigned within the year. A photograph surfaced in a private collection, distinct from the one taken in 1915, yet bearing unmistakable continuity. Dated 1949, it showed a group of children in front of a boarded-up schoolhouse. Their faces echoed the same symmetry: wide-set eyes, narrow chins, expressions hollowed by something more than poverty. No teacher was identified. No records of the school's operation during that period could be verified. The collector, an amateur historian, refused to part with the photo and later claimed it had gone missing. He described the children in it as genetically wrong. He died in 1982 under undisclosed circumstances. By the early 1980s, the anthropological team had disbanded. Their report was never published. One of the lead researchers, in a private letter to a colleague, wrote that they had stumbled not onto a family tree, but into a closed circuit, a loop of blood and silence that did not begin with isolation, but with intent. The phrase puzzled even those closest to the project. Attempts to clarify were met with silence. In 1987, a patient admitted to a psychiatric facility in northern Alabama presented with symptoms that confounded the intake staff. He was nonverbal but hyper-alert, his senses tuned to frequencies no one else could hear. His fingerprints returned no matches. He bore no scars, no dental fillings, no marks of any kind save for a thin, linear indentation around his neck, as if something had once been worn there, tightly, for a long time. When shown objects, books, toys, clothing, he reacted only to an old, water-damaged map of Clay County, which he tore apart before curling into himself. He died 3 months later without ever speaking. His autopsy revealed a heart defect inconsistent with any known congenital condition. The attending physician noted the shape of the organ, not deformed, but subtly different in orientation. She listed the cause of death as cardiac failure due to systemic collapse. His file, like so many others, was later marked as lost during a departmental reorganization. And still, the surname persisted, not in records or gravestones, but in fragments. A whisper in an intake form, a mutation in a blood sample, a face in an old photo that shouldn't exist. The Whitmore line, it seemed, had not ended. It had only receded, waiting in the genetic margins, hidden not by distance, but by design. The Whitmore farmhouse no longer exists. Its foundation was unearthed in the spring of 1962 by a survey crew expanding utility access to the northern stretches of Clay County. What they found was not a structure, but the ghost of one: scorched beams, charred nails, and stone steps leading to nothing. The surrounding trees bore fire damage up to their mid-trunks, suggesting a burn that was not recent, yet not ancient either. No official record of a fire exists. No insurance claim, no fire department response, no mention in the local paper. It was as if the house had simply ceased to be, quietly, and without witness. The land today is overgrown, reclaimed by kudzu and oak. The clearing where the house once stood remains oddly flat, as though the earth itself refuses to forget what was built there. Survey maps list the area as undeveloped, but older charts contain a faint outline, labeled only as Parcel 47A. No further details accompany the designation. The parcel is bordered by rusted wire fencing that vanishes into the underbrush. Small wooden stakes, unmarked and uneven, emerge from the soil at irregular intervals, grave markers perhaps, or something older. Among the few artifacts recovered from the site was a fragment of iron bed frame fused with what appeared to be bone. Forensic analysis was inconclusive. The remains were never identified nor claimed. They were buried in a municipal grave with a number instead of a name. Another item, a glass jar sealed with wax, contained locks of hair, some gray, some blonde, all bound tightly with twine. A third item, less easily explained, was a small wooden figure with elongated limbs and no face, wrapped in muslin. It crumbled when handled, leaving only dust and the faint scent of mildew. The original photograph, the one taken in 1915, was relocated from the county archive to a private collection in 1991. The curator, a collector of anomalous Americana, displayed it briefly before retiring it to storage. He claimed the image changed each time he viewed it, not in composition, but in presence. The expressions, he said, grew harder to read, the background darker, the space between the figures wider. He eventually locked the photograph in a climate-controlled safe and refused to discuss it further. In 2003, a regional historian attempting to write a genealogical compendium of Clay County omitted the Whitmores entirely. When questioned, she stated that no credible data existed to support their inclusion. Her notes, later published posthumously, contained a single penciled line under the heading Family, Whitmore, records found but subsequently withdrawn. The editor assumed it was a clerical reference. Others were less sure. Urban exploration forums occasionally mention the Whitmore site, though exact coordinates are rarely shared. Those who claim to have visited describe a quiet so profound it feels manufactured. One post recounts hearing rhythmic knocks in the distance, 5 at a time, spaced evenly, though no structure stood for the sound to echo from. The post was deleted within hours. The user never posted again. A regional power outage in 2011, unexplained and highly localized, darkened the area around Parcel 47A for 6 minutes. The grid failure was traced to a relay station that had not failed in 40 years. Engineers found no malfunction. Surveillance logs during the blackout revealed only static. Today, the Whitmore name exists solely in whispers, in disjointed records, and in the spaces where documentation should be but isn't. The family left no legacy in the traditional sense, no businesses, no descendants in public office, no burial plots with etched stones. They are not mourned nor remembered, but they are not entirely gone. They remain in the unresolved, in the lines redacted without explanation, in the children whose names never entered a ledger, in the faces that reappear, unbidden, in the dreams of those who've seen the photograph too many times. Some histories are not erased, they are absorbed. And in the quiet parts of Alabama, there is a silence too deliberate to be natural. A silence where something once lived, and perhaps still does.